My name is Erin Calloway. I'm 37 years old. I was raised in Northern Virginia. That Sunday, I wished I hadn't come home. She's just good at clicking around on her little laptop, Mom said, smiling into her wine glass. I was halfway through, passing the sweet potatoes across the table when she said it, loud enough for the whole dining room to hear. They laughed, not all of them, but enough. Enough that I felt the heat crawl up my neck. Enough that my cousin Ben let out one of his sharp little snorts. Enough that even the neighbor's son Kyle raised an eyebrow over his fork. I didn't say a word. I didn't even blink. I just set the bowl down gently in front of Aunt Rochelle and took my seat again, knees touching the underside of the pine wood table. My hands folded in my lap. The centerpiece candles flickered as someone opened the back door for fresh air. Thanksgiving leftovers still clung to the walls, cinnamon ham, and something overcooked. Mom kept pouring Merlot like nothing had passed. She's always been good with gadgets, she added lightly. We thought she'd grow out of it. My sister Emily gave a pitying smile. Maybe next year you'll win something bigger, Erin. I looked down at my plate. The turkey had gone cold. Across the room, Kyle, now wearing cadet blues, paused mid-chew. His eyes tracked the man who had just entered the foyer. Someone in uniform, gray service jacket. No one else noticed yet. But I did. And he saw me. He stopped just inside the door, eyes scanning, and then he gave a barely perceptible nod. My mother was still talking. There was a hollow ringing in my ears, but I kept my posture steady. The room had that dense, performative kind of warmth that only family gatherings possess, full of pretend affection and real judgment. The table was packed 12 of us crammed into a dining room designed for 8. The overhead chandelier buzzed faintly, one bulb flickering. In the kitchen, something beeped, likely the stove someone forgot to turn off. I stared at the mashed potatoes on my plate and thought about how surreal it felt to be here, to be 37 years old, and still reduced to clicking around in my own mother's eyes. My sister leaned in, her voice soft but perfectly timed so that others could still hear. Hey, she said, at least you're consistent. I mean, 6 awards is impressive. If they actually mattered. Her husband laughed, loudly. I looked at my glass of water. There were 3 lemon seeds floating in it. No one asked me where I'd flown in from the night before. No one asked why I had shown up late or why I hadn't RSVP'd. They didn't notice the bruising along my knuckles or the stiffness in my left shoulder. Mom had hugged me without eye contact. Dad hadn't even looked up from the football game. They all assumed I was the same girl who used to spend hours in the basement building websites and skipping prom. In their minds, I never left the house. I reached down to adjust the sleeve of my sweater, careful to make sure the edge of the name tape on the shirt underneath didn't show. It wasn't time. Not yet. Kyle, seated 2 spots away, kept glancing toward the hallway. He must have recognized the rank, or the face. There was a subtle tension forming, like the first seconds before a pressure valve hisses open. But around the table, the charade rolled on. Uncle Mitch launched into a story about his golf tournament, while Aunt Rochelle nodded politely and refilled her glass with boxed Chardonnay. Someone passed the rolls again. My mother dropped a cranberry slice onto her plate with an indifferent splat. I studied the reflections in the silverware. There was my face, slightly tired, slightly older. And yet, sharper now. 3 years ago, I would have cried in the guest room after a comment like that. 2 years ago, I would have made an excuse and left early. 1 year ago, I would have flown back without showing up at all. But tonight, I simply sat still. Let the weight of their words settle like dust. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. It was something colder than that. Something quieter. Kyle stood suddenly. He cleared his throat and said he needed to get something from the car. But he didn't go outside. He went into the front hallway instead. And then it happened. The front door creaked again. A pause. Then, "Sir, do you want me to announce you?" No reply. A second later, boots sounded softly against the hardwood floor. I didn't turn. Not yet. But the air changed. Something heavy and authoritative walked into that room. My mother kept talking, recounting some story about how I once took apart the toaster at age 9 and forgot to put it back together. Someone chuckled. I looked up, and there he was, Brigadier General Marcus Landon, Army National Guard. standing calmly beside the fireplace, his eyes already locked on me. You could feel the confusion ripple. Kyle stood behind him at attention. I didn't move. No one else knew who he was, yet not really. Just some older man in uniform, the kind who shouldn't need to knock. He took one step forward, and then in front of everyone he nodded toward me, slow, deliberate, unmistakable. "Ma'am." The room stilled. My fork froze mid-air. Someone dropped a spoon. Mom's smile faltered. Just barely. Emily blinked twice. "Wait." What Brigadier General Landon glanced at the table. "Sorry to interrupt. I was in the area and owed Captain Calloway a briefing. Didn't expect so many civilians." He smiled faintly, like the kind of man who didn't care for approval. The silence was glass thin. I finally placed my napkin down. "I'm almost done here, sir," I said, voice even. 5 minutes. He gave a sharp nod. "Yes, ma'am. I'll wait." And with that, he stepped aside and stood silently by the entryway. Eyes were on me now, dozens of them. But I didn't say another word. I picked up my fork again, finished the bite of cold turkey, then calmly reached for my water, as if none of this surprised me, because it didn't. Not anymore. When I was younger, I used to think silence was the price of being good. Good daughters didn't interrupt. Good sisters stayed out of the spotlight. Good women didn't correct people at the table, especially not in front of guests. I learned to shrink early. My name is Erin Calloway. I was born in Prince William County, Virginia, in the tail end of spring, a May baby who cried silently in the crib and startled easily at loud noises. By the time I was 8, I could already fix our internet router without asking Dad. By 11, I had my own login to the back end of the school's website and was quietly adjusting assignment due dates for half the class. Not cheating, just curious. Mom thought I was weird. She said it in a loving way most of the time. Erin's the little wizard she'd tell people at church potlucks. Give her a screen and a soda and she's good for 8 hours. I didn't realize until years later that she never once called me brilliant, or hardworking, or anything that made me feel seen. I was a party trick, an oddity. My sister Emily was the beautiful one, the social one. She got the good cheekbones, the soft voice, the easy attention. She was homecoming court twice, even dated a Redskins linebacker briefly in college. She worked in public relations now, mostly for real estate firms in Loudoun County. And me, I was the one who stayed up until 2 a.m. rebuilding motherboards, just to see if I could make them run quieter. I was the girl who never quite knew what to say at family functions, who wore the same black blazer to every holiday, who forgot birthdays, but remembered every Wi-Fi password the family had ever used since 1999. In high school, when I started entering programming competitions, Mom told me not to make a big deal about it. "You don't want people thinking you're showing off," she said. So I didn't. Even when I won the Regional Robotics Challenge. Even when I got a call from a DoD recruiter during my junior year of college. Even when I was quietly invited to a defense tech fellowship no one in the family even knew existed. I never bragged. I never brought home medals or trophies or even photos. I didn't talk about my deployments or the kinds of systems I'd helped build or the code I'd written that now quietly powered parts of the military's battlefield simulation systems. I didn't talk about the weight I carried, the operations I couldn't mention, the people who trusted me to keep them safe with code they'd never see. Because if I did, I could hear Mom's voice in my head already. "So, what now, you think you're special?" So I stayed small. By the time I hit my 30s, they'd all gotten used to thinking of me as the one who messed with computers, but never really did anything. When Emily started her business, the whole family threw a party. When she landed a press feature, they framed it on the hallway wall. When I got flown to Qatar to help re-architect an entire tactical communication network, I didn't even tell them. I wasn't ashamed, but I knew they wouldn't get it, and I'd rather protect the thing I loved than expose it to their misunderstanding. I saw how they treated other people who tried. My cousin Lily became a nurse and was immediately labeled bossy. My uncle's wife opened a bakery and they all called it a cute little hobby. But when Emily sold her first 6-figure client contract, Mom nearly cried with pride. So I learned to stay quiet. I sent postcards from airports and remote bases but never listed the real return address. I RSVP'd to family events late. I kept my stories vague. I smiled at their jokes even when they cut deep, like the time Uncle Mitch asked if I still worked for Google or the CIA or whatever it is now. Or when Emily told her friends at Christmas that I basically live in Excel. I laughed. I always laughed. But sometimes when I was alone, I'd wonder what would happen if I stopped hiding, if I wore my badge into the house, if I let them see the rows of ribbons in my drawer, if I explained what it meant to be promoted mid-mission, or to be handed an encrypted hard drive that could change the outcome of a classified deployment. I wondered what Mom would say, if she'd even believe it. The truth is, I think she'd be embarrassed. Not because I wasn't successful, but because my success didn't look like something she could show off. It didn't come in high heels and studio lighting. It didn't win homecoming crowns or take pretty photos for Facebook. It came in long-hour scarred knuckles and top-secret clearance. And so, when I sat at that table and heard her call it clicking, I didn't flinch. Not really, because I'd already made peace with the fact that some people will never understand quiet power. They'll only see what fits inside their frame. And I had outgrown that frame years ago. Still, something about that day felt different. Maybe it was because it was the first time I didn't feel hurt, only hollow. Like I was watching a scene I'd already lived through too many times. Like I could predict every word before it left their mouths. But then Brigadier Landon had walked in, and everything paused. For just a moment, the kind I knew would echo in memory. I felt something shift, not in them, in me. I wasn't there to prove anything anymore, but they were about to see the truth anyway, and that I realized was its own kind of justice. There was a moment in my 20s when I thought I could fix it, that if I just worked harder, called more often, showed up to more birthdays, I could patch over the cracks in my relationship with my family, that maybe they didn't mean to overlook me, that maybe I was too sensitive. I told myself that, for years. Until the night of Emily's engagement party. It was a warm October evening, the kind where the sky glows purple just after sunset and everything feels suspended in gold. The backyard had been strung with lights and a white rental tent covered the buffet. I'd flown in from San Diego the night before after spending 16 weeks leading a tech integration team for a multilateral NATO CIMEX. I was sleep-deprived, mildly jet-lagged, and still had half of an encrypted laptop in my carry-on waiting to be debugged. But I was there. I showed up. I brought a bottle of wine and even helped string the lights. I wore the nicest dress I owned, a navy sheath with capped sleeves, and curled my hair. I smiled at distant cousins I barely remembered. Then, right after the first toast, Mom made her speech. She stood near the microphone glass in hand, tears already brimming. Emily looked radiant. Her fiancé, Mark, beamed down at her like he'd just found the last good woman on earth. And Mom said, "When I look at Emily, I see the future of this family. I see someone who makes us proud every single day. I see grace, beauty, leadership." There was polite clapping. I smiled too. Then came the turn. "And you know," she added, looking around, "every family has a wild card. Someone who goes off in her own direction, who doesn't really stay in touch. But we still love her, from afar." People laughed, real laughter this time. The kind that stings. Her eyes didn't land on me directly, but they didn't need to. I felt them anyway. And that was the night I stopped pretending. Because that wasn't a slip of the tongue. That was a choice. She wanted to make sure the room understood I wasn't the golden one. I wasn't even the runner-up. I was the distant question mark tolerated out of tradition, but not trusted. Later that evening, I overheard Aunt Rochelle say, "At least Emily's staying close." Not like Aaron always disappearing on some project. She said it with air quotes, with an eye roll. It was as if my life's work had become a punchline, something absurd, something disposable. I walked to the edge of the lawn and stared at the dark outline of the trees, trying to keep my face from folding. My phone buzzed in my clutch, a secure ping from a junior officer needing a review on a system diagram. I sent back a single line of code to fix the fault and waited for the confirmed ma'am. No one else saw it. No one else would have understood what I'd just prevented, and no one would ever know. Because they didn't want to. They didn't want the version of me that actually existed. They wanted the soft-edged version, the simple one. The storybook failure, The girl who drifted too far, worked too much, stayed single, never settled down. They liked that version. It made them feel more secure about their own paths. I became convenient fiction, and over the years, little by little, they took more from me than they realized. They took the right to be proud of myself. They took the joy of sharing my achievements. They took away the comfort of coming home and being known. They turned me into a ghost that still walked through family events, smiling politely, giving gifts, asking about jobs and kids and hobbies, and never once being asked, "And what about you, Aaron?" Not really. Not the real question. No one asked about the nights I spent in rooms without windows, or the briefings that kept me up until dawn, or the names I had to memorize and never forget. They didn't ask because they didn't want to know. And so I gave up trying. I stopped offering pieces of myself. Stopped sending emails with photos from deployments or forwarding links when one of my defense programs quietly won federal recognition. I even removed them from my emergency contact forms. It felt petty at first, but eventually it just felt like self-preservation, because every time I reached out, they clipped my wings a little more. And yet, I still kept showing up. I told myself it was loyalty, family, some invisible rope that tethered me to them. But deep down, I think I was waiting, not for their apology, just for anyone to see me. That's why when Brigadier Landon walked through that door on Thanksgiving and looked directly at me, not past me, not through me, but at me, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in years: recognition, and the silence that followed. It wasn't awkward. It was mine. My silence, my power, my control. Not the kind they imposed on me through jokes or subtle digs. The kind I chose. They had taken everything they could take, but they couldn't erase what I'd built without them. And that I realized was the beginning of the end. The moment I stopped playing small in a house built on denial. Because they were about to see who I was. Not because I needed them to, but because I had stopped hiding. The worst part wasn't what they said. It was how normal it felt. How easily I nodded and laughed and passed the roles even after being dressed down by my own mother in front of 12 people and a half-empty bottle of Merlot. That night, after everyone left, I lay awake in the guest room staring at the ceiling fan, still dressed, still pinned inside, the same silence I'd carried all dinner long. They'd gone to sleep hours ago. The house had gone soft with night noises, the old heating pipes ticking the fridge, humming in fits, and all I could think was, maybe they're right. Maybe I really was just clicking. Maybe my ribbons meant nothing. Maybe the secure servers the code the nights I'd worked until I bled from the nose in a sand-stormed bunker in Erbil. Maybe none of it mattered, because if your own mother can look at 6 National Defense Awards and laugh, what does that say? What does that make you? A glitch, a burden, someone they keep tolerating out of obligation, not pride. I rolled to my side and pulled the blanket up over my face. No tears. I couldn't cry, not because I didn't want to, but because my body had stopped letting me. I'd learned to swallow emotion like stale bread. Quietly, quickly. I stared at the blinking green light of the Wi-Fi router across the room and counted every pulse like a metronome. That's what I did when I couldn't sleep. Count pulses, keep systems running in my mind. I remembered the time I'd almost walked away from it all, not just from my family, but from the military too. From the life I had carved out of thin air through back doors and battlefields and code stitched in silence. It had been 2 years earlier. We were rotating out of a remote op in Kandahar when we lost signal on a reconnaissance drone mid-flight. Command was already on edge. Our firewall had been glitching for weeks, but I'd patched it manually the night before and was sure the new stack would hold. It didn't. The drone spiraled off course. We recovered the footage, but barely. It showed patterns none of us recognized, chatter that shouldn't have been there. When I played it back for my CO, his face went pale. What the hell is that? I knew the answer, and I knew what it meant. I went back to my quarters, sat on the floor, and watched the sun rise through the vents, watched it climb like nothing had happened, like the world didn't just crack open a little. For the next 3 weeks, I worked around the clock. I didn't shower. I barely ate. I wrote the patch that sealed the leak, and no one ever mentioned it again. Not even my CO. Not the tech leads, not the brass. It was classified, of course. But also, it was invisible. No one gives medals for what doesn't go wrong. And when I finally flew home after that tour, hollowed out and silent, I found a voicemail from Mom. "Hey, just checking if you're coming to Emily's launch event next Saturday. Big moment. Don't forget to wear something nice this time. No welcome home. No, are you okay? Not even a congrats on surviving another tour in the most unstable quadrant in CENTCOM's jurisdiction. Just a reminder to wear something pretty, so I wouldn't embarrass them." That's when it started the erosion. Not dramatic, just slow, like water against stone. I started doubting everything, started wondering whether the life I'd built was even real or just a projection no one else could see. At first, I told myself they just didn't get it the way some people don't understand quantum mechanics or open source protocols. But it felt deeper than ignorance. It felt intentional, like they chose not to get it, like they were more comfortable imagining me as the weird recluse than as someone who made hard calls in dark rooms. And in those months after Kandahar, something inside me cracked. I stopped taking on big roles, turned down a promotion, told myself I needed rest, but really I needed permission. Permission to believe in my own worth again. And the silence from my family filled that space, reinforced it, told me without ever saying a word that maybe my story wasn't worth telling, that maybe I'd wasted all those years proving something no one cared to see. So I almost walked away, not just from them, from the work, from the deployments, the code, the missions, the meaning. There was one week in particular where I came dangerously close. I remember it like static, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, just stared at my wall and wondered what it would be like to disappear. Not die, just vanish, quietly, no confrontation, no explanation, just one day gone, a missing daughter, a forgotten file, a set of skills no one ever quite knew what to do with. It's strange what the human mind considers escape. Mine wanted to walk barefoot into anonymity, to disappear inside the crowd I'd outgrown. There's something cruel about being good at something that no one close to you understands. It's like screaming into a vacuum, all effort, no echo. After I nearly resigned, I went dark for a while. Not officially, just emotionally. I still reported for duty, still coded, still reviewed security patches, and authored silent fixes to networks no civilian would ever hear about. But inside, I felt like a shadow of myself. I stopped volunteering for lead assignments. I sat in meetings and nodded but stopped offering input. I told myself I was resting. The truth was, I was shrinking. I stopped replying to most texts, not that many came in. The family group chat was still flooded with photos of baby showers and Brunch's real estate closings and Emily's new PR clients. They'd post articles from lifestyle blogs she was featured in. "Aaron, did you see this?" someone wrote once. I hadn't. I didn't reply. There was something about watching my sister's curated success that chipped away at whatever confidence I had left. It wasn't jealousy. It was erasure. It was watching the world applaud something bright and glossy while you sat in a basement bunker, fingers raw, feeding a silent machine that kept lives intact and knowing no one would ever clap for you. Once during a joint training event at Fort Meade, a younger officer pulled me aside after a presentation and said, "Ma'am, I read your 2021 patch log. It changed how I code." I smiled and said thank you. But the moment she left, I sat in the hallway with my back against the wall and nearly broke, because it felt like she saw me more in 10 seconds than my own family had in 10 years. I think that's when the shift began, not dramatic, but real, a flicker. Like when power surges back into a house after a blackout and the fridge hums to life and the lights blink once and everything isn't fully back, but you know it will be. Still, I wasn't ready yet. I was tired, and even hope felt heavy. One night, I called my old friend Marcus, now Brigadier Landon, just to hear a familiar voice. We hadn't talked much outside of briefings and command notes, but I trusted him. He'd been my CO once. He knew what I'd done. He picked up on the first ring. I didn't tell him everything. I didn't have to. We spoke in code the way we always did, short, sparse with meaning tucked between silences. Finally, after a long pause, he said, "You're not invisible. You're classified. That's not the same. That line stayed with me. You're not invisible. You're classified. There's dignity in that difference. Because invisibility is neglect, classification is protection. Maybe I wasn't being erased. Maybe I had chosen a life that by design kept me hidden and I'd just forgotten why. And maybe the real problem wasn't that my family didn't understand. Maybe the problem was that I kept expecting them to. Expecting validation from people whose entire measurement system was built on pageantry and public praise. I stayed on the call a little longer. Marcus told me about a new systems unit being stood up, one that needed someone like me. He didn't say the word comeback. He didn't have to. He just said, "We'll need someone sharp, someone with cold hands and steady code. That's you." When I hung up, it was the first time in months that I didn't feel like a ghost. The next morning, I opened the storage bin in my hallway closet, the one I hadn't touched since returning from my last tour, and took out my old fatigue jacket. The scent of dust and desert wind rose with it. I ran my fingers over the stitching Callaway. Still there. Still real. Later that week, I submitted my transfer paperwork. I requested reassignment to the integration team at Northcom, as well as a reactivation of my secure comms clearance for field coding roles. My CO approved it with a note. "The quiet ones make the best warriors. Welcome back." I didn't respond. I just closed the message and let myself feel it for a few seconds. Then I got to work. Because here's what no one tells you. Climbing back is slower than falling, and no one's watching. There's no applause, no spotlight, no parade. You heal in silence, in code, in tiny moments when you remember you are not the version of yourself they imagined and never were. That winter, I started training again. Late nights in simulation pods, 00400 briefings, dry runs of cyber breach responses, both real and artificial. It was brutal, and it was home. I didn't tell my family. They were busy planning Emily's wedding, a destination ceremony in Charleston with pastel bridesmaids' dresses and floral centerpieces that cost more than a defense-grade firewall. I was invited, of course. I RSVP'd, yes. Not out of obligation, but because I was no longer afraid to be in that room. Because something in me had realigned. I no longer needed them to see me. I just needed to stop hiding, and that I knew would be enough. The morning I flew out to Colorado Springs, I packed light. Just a duffel, a laptop, and my field badge. No dress uniform. No medals. Nothing flashy. I wasn't going there to prove anything. I was going there to remember who I'd always been. The integration team at Northcom wasn't flashy either. We worked in a sealed, unremarkable building tucked behind 2 layers of fencing and a checkpoint that could spot a forged ID at 30 meters. There was no sign outside, just a door with a card reader and a retinal scanner. Once you passed through, though, the air changed. Quiet hums, hushed commands, keyboards tapping like rain. This was the real room, the one that didn't exist on paper. The one where national cyber incidents didn't just get investigated, they got stopped before anyone ever knew they were happening. We weren't hackers, we were fixers, preemptive defense systems, coders who could outthink a malware string in under 3 minutes. Some of the best operators in the country were in that unit. Most were younger than me. But when I walked in and they saw the name on my badge, LT, Callaway, a few heads turned. Wait, the Black Widow of Wadi al-Malaz. I didn't answer, didn't smile, just nodded once and opened my laptop. There are stories that get passed around in whispers field ops that never made the news but saved hundreds of lives. Wadi al-Malaz was one of them. 3 years ago, a classified comms network in northern Syria was breached by an AI-augmented virus that learned in real time. It mutated every 10 seconds and tore through the encryption like it was cotton thread. Command called me in from Qatar. I isolated the anomaly in under 7 minutes, quarantined it, rewrote our defense protocol, left a false trail so the infiltrators would think they'd succeeded while we ghosted the entire system. We saved the mission. That night, one of the junior officers whispered to another, "She codes like a widow, cold, quiet, and final." The name stuck. I never liked it, but I didn't reject it either. Back at Northcom, I worked quietly. They gave me a desk in the back corner and a triple-screen rig. No one micromanaged, they just let me build. In a matter of weeks, I'd redesigned their breach response module, built a new redundancy failover protocol, caught 2 attempted intrusions, one of which was so subtle it had gone unnoticed for over 6 months. One day, Colonel Dean came by my desk and left a sticky note. "Every system needs a spine. You're ours." I didn't need praise, but it hit me anyway, because after years of being sidelined by people who measured success by photo ops and applause, this was different. This was real. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to recover, not just professionally, personally. I reconnected with a few old squad mates, sent a couple birthday cards I'd forgotten the year before, even joined a Discord group for women in Cyber Command. No avatars, just initials and pure support. And I trained, quietly, methodically. Tactical response, emergency relocation drills, real-time decryption under pressure. Not because I had something to prove, but because it was time. Because I knew deep down that I hadn't seen the last of the people who laughed at me, and when the moment came, if it came, I wanted to be ready. That spring, an invitation arrived in the mail. Cream envelope, gold script. Emily and Jonathan cordially invite you to celebrate their marriage. Saturday, May 18th, Charleston, South Carolina. I stared at it for a long time. It would have been easy to throw it away, easier still not to show up. But I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I just wanted to walk in as myself, no armor, no proof, and let silence do the talking. Still, I packed the fatigue jacket, folded it carefully, and tucked it at the bottom of my carry-on underneath a soft gray dress and a pair of flats. Not because I planned to wear it, but because I needed to know it was there. That night, I checked my flight info one more time and sent a single text to Brigadier Landon. "Me if I get that look again, the one from Mom." "I might vanish into the ocean," he replied instantly. Landon. "Then I'll be the tide." I smiled. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I felt seen. The morning of the wedding, I walked along the Charleston harbor alone. The breeze was warm, salt air and magnolia. My dress fluttered in the wind, and for a second I remembered what it felt like to be 19, hopeful and invisible, and still waiting for someone to say I mattered. I let that version of me go. By the time I walked into the venue, a converted southern chapel with vaulted ceilings and hydrangeas in crystal vases, I was calm, quiet, like loaded code just waiting to run. Mom saw me first. Her lips pressed into a line. She nodded toward the back where seating assignments had been placed. "Families on the right," she said, eyes scanning me up and down. Unless you're working security, I didn't flinch. I just looked at her and said nothing. Then I walked forward, spine straight, heart still, and took my seat. Because this time I wasn't there for approval. I was there to watch the whole room learn what silence can do. The ceremony was long. Emily, my sister, looked perfect, perfectly poised, perfectly matched, perfectly adored by the 200 guests who clapped like she was a princess from some southern romance. I watched her from the third row. She wore a custom off-shoulder gown and her signature smirk. Jonathan, her fiancé, was all nerves and dimples, practically vibrating with joy. She was everything Mom ever wanted from a daughter, graceful, obedient, decorated in all the right ways. The girl who didn't get her fingers dirty. The girl who never had to learn silence. I didn't resent her, but I no longer envied her either. When they kissed, the crowd erupted. I clapped, quietly. Then came the reception. A sprawling garden tent with crystal lights and a live jazz trio. The place cards were calligraphed by hand. My seat, of course, was at the overflow cousin table near the buffet. I didn't mind. It gave me a better view of everything, especially of Mom. She was making rounds like a general on parade shoulders, back Pearl's gleaming voice, always just slightly louder than the person next to her. I saw her approach a small circle of family friends from the military base. Old names, familiar ranks, retired mostly. 1 brigadier, 2 colonels. That's when I felt it again, that sharp pull behind the ribs. The reflex to stand to clarify, to insert myself into the conversation so they'd know I wasn't just Emily's sister. But I didn't move. I sipped my water and waited. Then I heard it. A voice. Hers. Loud enough for the table to hear. Oh, Emily always had the head for detail. You know, she even fixed her sister's little coding project once. Poor thing Emily had to come in and organize it all. She's the real brain in the family. There it was. The lie. Delivered with that same tight smile she used when I came home from deployment and she told guests I'd taken a little break to travel. I felt heat rise behind my ears. Not rage, not even hurt. Just precision. This time I stood up. Not fast, not dramatic. Just enough for the motion to be noticed. Enough to draw a couple pairs of eyes from the buffet line. Enough that I caught the glance of one of the colonels who'd just chuckled at Mom's remark. I didn't approach her. I walked out the side of the tent and into the bridal suite building where the wedding party had left their things. Found my carry-on, opened it. The jacket was still there, pressed clean untouched since Colorado. A standard-issue OCP blouse, but with the embroidered name Strip U.S. Army across the chest and, most importantly, the patch on the arm. Cyber Operations Command, National Guard, and above the heart a rectangular bar of 6 small pins, 6 national-level commendations. I slipped it on, buttoned only the top 2 buttons, rolled the sleeves slightly, checked the mirror. The dress underneath softened the look. Feminine. Intentional. Not a costume, not overkill. Just true. When I walked back into the reception, no one noticed at first. Then the ripple started. 2 heads turned, then 4. Then the room adjusted. Like a current had entered. I didn't look for Mom. I walked straight to the table where the senior military guests were seated. Calm, controlled, and then, completely unplanned, Brigadier Landon appeared. I hadn't seen him arrive. But there he was standing just behind the colonel's shoulder holding a small cup of coffee. He froze when he saw me. His eyes widened. The cup trembled. And then, in the slowest, sharpest motion I'd ever seen from him, he set the cup down, straightened, and gave me a formal salute. Not casual, not friendly. Formal. Lieutenant Calloway. Ma'am. The colonel next to him blinked. Then stood. Then the other one. Within seconds, 3 senior officers were on their feet, saluting. The music hadn't stopped yet, but the room had. Even Mom. She turned just as I lowered my hand in return. I didn't smile, didn't speak. But she saw the patch, she saw the pins, she saw the weight of everything she'd dismissed, and for the first time in my life, she had no words. Emily approached a few minutes later, still in her wedding gown. Was that? For real, she asked, half laughing. I looked at her, my golden sister the apple of everyone's eye, and said nothing. Then I reached into my blazer, pulled out a small envelope, and handed it to her. Inside was a USB, unmarked, and a note. This is the tool set I used to reverse engineer the malware inside Northcom's blackout last fall. You said you fixed my coding project once. Let me know how you'd improve this. She didn't open it. Not then. She just stared at me like she didn't know what world I lived in. And maybe she didn't, but it was time she learned, because I wasn't the quiet daughter anymore. I was the one they saluted. I didn't return to my seat. After the salute, the stares, the silence, I moved toward the far end of the reception tent behind the hydrangeas and garden lights and stood by the stone railing that overlooked the hills. I needed air. The kind of air that wasn't wrapped in performance or shame. Inside, the wedding reception restarted like someone hit play. Jazz notes resumed. Chatter rose again. But it was different now. The energy had shifted. The laughter wasn't as confident. The conversations had a new edge, like someone had whispered a rumor no one could unhear. Did you see that is she military? I thought she was just a coder. And then the new version, she's Lieutenant Calloway. She's in Cyber Command, National Guard. That was a brigadier general who saluted her. Word travels faster than wireless in these circles, especially when it bruises ego. I stood alone for a few minutes, watching the sky change, watching the light shift on the trees. And then I heard heels, clicking deliberately across the stone tiles. I didn't turn, but I didn't need to. What was that supposed to be Kayla Mom? Her voice was tight, controlled, not angry, not yet, but close. I let her speak first. You couldn't just let the day be about your sister. She took a breath behind me. You walk in here wearing a uniform of all things, and what try to embarrass me in front of officers I've known for decades. Still, I said nothing. You've always had to prove something, haven't you? My hands were calm, ever since you were little, always trying to win some invisible contest. I turned, not fast, not defensive, just so she could see my face when I finally answered her. I wasn't proving anything, I said quietly. I was correcting the record. She blinked. I could see it the moment the words landed but didn't compute. You called my commendations a little project. You said Emily fixed my work. It was a joke, she said, shrugging. God, Kayla, you're always so sensitive. I smiled, not warmly. You're always so proud. She took a step back. Do you know what I do, Mom? I asked, still in that quiet, clean tone. Really, no. She didn't answer. So I told her. I work with the 169th Cyber Protection Team. We intercept and neutralize digital threats to national infrastructure. We run penetration testing against Northcom. We designed containment around the Lake City blackout. I've had 2 deployments, not boots on ground, but tactical nodes. And yes, those 6 awards, they're from federal ops, not coding camps. I paused. You never asked. You assumed. Her expression hardened, not in denial, but in discomfort. This wasn't a world she understood, or wanted to. I just didn't think it was a big deal, she said softer now, because I didn't wear it like a badge, because I didn't need an audience. I let the silence stretch. But when you minimized it, I added, you didn't just insult me. You erased me. In a room where I've already been invisible for years. She crossed her arms, a nervous tic she always used when she lost her footing. You know, if you'd told me all this sooner, would you have listened? She didn't respond. No, I said, because your version of success never included me. It only made room for girls like Emily. That landed hard. I saw her eyes flicker, not with guilt exactly, with reckoning. The first time I'd ever seen her cornered by nothing but the truth. You don't have to be proud of me, I said, but you don't get to lie about me anymore. That was the line. That was the moment the air split. Not loud, not cruel, but undeniable. She stepped away, and I didn't follow. By the time I stepped back inside, the head table was down a sister and a mother. Emily was still posing for photos near the cake. She hadn't seen the shift yet, or maybe she'd chosen not to. People noticed me walk in. This time, no one asked me to move out of the way. No one called me just Kayla. I didn't speak. I didn't smile. I simply crossed the room and took my seat at the edge of the room where I'd been placed. I sat differently this time, not straighter, not stiffer, just settled. I belonged here, and they knew it now. The microphone squealed slightly and someone tapped it. Uncle Ron. He was standing awkwardly by the sound system, a glass of cheap champagne in one hand, the mic in the other. Sorry, everyone, he said, chuckling nervously. I just wanted to say a few words about our bride and groom. A smattering of claps. I kept my eyes on the table. Emily, sweetheart. I still remember when you were just 5 years old and told us you wanted to run the whole world. More laughter. And you found someone crazy enough to help you do it. Some genuine warmth in that one. But before we raise a glass, I think we should also recognize someone else in the room who's been doing some world saving of her own. The room tensed. Emily's smile froze mid-laugh. I just learned today that our own Kayla Calloway, that Kayla is actually a lieutenant in the National Guard's Cyber Division. There were audible whispers, some gasps. Apparently she's got more awards than most of us have tax deductions. A light chuckle, nervous, but curious. He went on. Now I didn't know that, and I'm guessing a lot of us didn't. But I think it's high time we say, Lieutenant Calloway, thank you for your service. He raised his glass. To Kayla. And then it happened. A voice from the back of the tent, low, clear, unmistakable, ma'am. I turned slowly. It was Brigadier General Hayes. Still in uniform, still composed. He gave me a slight nod, the kind of nod that means I see you. And then, to the surprise of everyone, he stepped forward, stood at parade rest, and saluted. A full, formal salute. I stood not out of pride, out of protocol, and returned it. Silence. No one moved, no one dared speak. Then the general spoke again. Lieutenant Calloway's team shut down a supply chain breach that could have paralyzed our Pacific ops. She worked through Christmas. She coded the trapdoor exploit. She deserves more than this room gave her. He paused, and she never once asked for recognition. He turned to Emily, to Mom, then to the rest of the crowd. We should all be so lucky to have her in our family. He nodded again and walked out. No music, no applause. Just the sound of awareness arriving all at once, and the silence it left behind. I sat back down. No smile, no tears, just stillness. Emily didn't come near me. Mom stayed outside, and that was fine, because the point had never been to take their spotlight. It was to show that I'd never needed it. It's been 3 years. Sometimes I still get invited to family events, sometimes I don't. And when I do, I decide carefully whether to go, not out of resentment, out of peace, because I no longer attend out of duty, or guilt, or some tired hope that maybe this time I'll be treated as enough. I already am. I think about that wedding sometimes. Not the decorations or the dress or the music. I barely remember any of that. What I remember is the moment the general saluted, not for what it meant to them, but what it confirmed for me, that I had built something real, without applause, without validation, without needing permission to matter. Just months after that day, I was deployed again. Quiet, classified work, the kind that earns ribbons, not headlines. I flew out under a cold December sky with a duffel bag, a code kit, and 2 laminated letters of commendation in my pocket, one of them signed by Hayes himself. I still didn't tell Mom, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I'd stopped needing to explain who I am. She found out from a friend's newsletter, and when she called me, her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "Are you safe?" That was all she said, not "I'm proud of you," not "I was wrong." But I heard it anyway, and I answered simply, "I'm steady, I've been promoted since then. Captain now." The nameplate on my desk is quiet, just letters, no gold trim. I keep a small photo next to it, me and 3 team members at a makeshift outpost, grinning in the dark over a portable terminal lit up with victory. No makeup, no filters, just truth. I still code at night sometimes. Not because I have to, but because I love it. The way a well-written loop sings, the satisfaction of debugging something others couldn't crack. It's poetry in a different language. I volunteer at a local high school once a week. Just a few girls at a time sitting in a computer lab that still smells like dust and ambition. Most of them don't think they're smart enough for tech, or brave enough for uniforms. I don't try to convince them otherwise. I just show them what it looks like to build something anyway. Last week, one of them raised her hand timidly and asked, "Did your family support you doing this?" And I looked her in the eye and said, "Not always." But I did it anyway. She nodded like she'd just been handed permission. There's a kind of healing that comes not from being acknowledged, but from knowing you no longer need to be. I see Mom sometimes. She visits, asks polite questions, brings leftover cake wrapped in foil like she used to when I was 10. She still talks more about Emily than me, but sometimes she pauses mid-sentence when she looks at my shoulder, where the rank bars are. She never comments on them, but I catch her eyes there lingering. It's enough. Emily and I don't talk much. She moved to Chicago. Her startup crashed after a year. Something about misused data in a lawsuit. I didn't ask. She didn't offer. We're polite at holidays. She once asked if I wanted to collab on a speaking panel for women in tech. I said no gently. Because some things aren't mine to fix. Some wounds are hers to sit with. And I've stopped bleeding on people who didn't cut me. My apartment is small, quiet mine. A wall of books. A dog named Syntax. 2 mugs I rotate. A plant I forget to water, but it keeps living anyway. I keep my medals in a drawer. Not because I'm ashamed of them, but because they were never the point. They were just mile markers on a road I chose. I framed one thing, though. A torn piece of napkin from that wedding where General Hayes scribbled his call sign and a single sentence after he saluted, "Keep building. The silence is your power." It hangs near the door. I touch it sometimes on my way out. It reminds me that some of the most powerful things we do are done without a spotlight. We rise, we serve, we lead even when no one claps, especially then. So no, I never needed their applause. What I needed was already mine: steady hands, a sharp mind, quiet resolve, and the ability to walk into any room, even one that tried to shame me, and stand tall in silence, because when they wouldn't give me a seat at their table, I built my own command.